got his stuff all set up.
This camera is yours for one fee. Which is my camera? Look at it. That's for Shmuley. That's going to be my camera. I'm just holding it to the last minute. Lucy just got a call from 6 people in Papua. When did you want to start? And this was where are you? At home.
You know that.
So these are set up.
He just needs to do whatever he needs
He's
to.
just got to click live on both and then the recording.
And I don't know his passwords or anything, but it's all hooked up. It's all angled
Now
correctly.
this guy, his expert, Charles.
Yes. Has already done it for him.
Very soon. Should I get him in here and get everybody seated?
You've got your drink, you've got your jacket. I'll go tell everybody to start taking seats. Why don't you just collect your thoughts and make sure that your script is ready for you?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
The second we wrap it, you'll grab the phones and run in there. But in there, we're only doing 2, correct? Our 2. So
Unless he wants one in there and I can put another one in.
Well, we're going to record it. It's recorded, so we'll give him the editing anyway.
Okay, I'm easy. I know. This is what happens when I'm told I have to have 4 more than what I normally have.
I'm going to go take a picture of the
Would you for a second? Thank you. It doesn't matter. That's not even what I'm worried about. Just take a seat. Thank you. That proved it. Is it good? I hate the lighting.
I just asked him. Doesn't like the lighting, so we're gonna take lighting routes.
If the lights got my studio lights down here, because we're going to do another show in the other room after this. I might be getting that light. Hopefully that will reach over there. If not, I need to get an extension for it. Yes, please.
And then can we turn those off and I'll turn those
Let's go. We got to see. How's that?
All good. Thank you.
It's 6:40, so we're punctual from Maui. Last one to just get comfortable, we'll start in half a second. That's all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You turned off on airplane?
And Wi-Fi's off.
Thank you.
Where's the rabbi? Rabbi?
All right, we'll ask everyone to get comfortable. I mean, it's not my house. I can't really ask you to get comfortable.
You can order them, you're a rabbi.
Barry says so. We'll ask you to get comfortable. Just want to say briefly. First of all, it's interesting to note that the Jewish people are known as Jews. It's cogent in all languages as Jews. Yehudim, Yehudi, Yid, Yahud, Jews. And it's interesting because most of the time in the Bible they're referred to Am Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, the people of Israel, not necessarily this term Jews, Yehudim. And the one place they are actually referred to as Yehudim is by Mordechai the Jew, Mordechai Yehudi. And the Talmud says that for this reason all Jews are known as Jews, right? So much so that I say all Jews, right? Because what is the defining characteristic trait of Mordechai the Jew is, it says by him in the story of the Megillah that Mordechai did not bow and he did not bend. Right? The one thing that the Megillah says in the story of Purim about his character is that he did not waver in his faith. He was a proud Jew. And for that reason, all of our people, all the Jewish people, are known by this name. And the reason why I say this is because the two esteemed gentlemen we're about to hear from are some of the proudest Jews that I have the exclusive privilege to know. About a year and a half ago, I believe Kati, was a year and a half ago? What time is the concert? Who knows?
2019.
Some point, BC, Kati did the event and she introduced me by the Filipino Heritage House, and she introduced me to our host, Barry Nussbaum, and I was shocked to meet such a proud Jew on island. They usually don't come this way on our beautiful little rock. So first of all, I'd like to say a profound appreciation to Barry and Denise Nussbaum for good ball buster. Who knows where she is?
She's with the dogs.
There you go. For hosting us and making this possible and going out of their way to have this evening. As well, we have our esteemed speaker, Rabbi Shmuley is as well. If any of you have been near a computer in the last 10 years or so and have ruled Israel, you probably have seen Rabbi Shmuley. Rabbi Shmuley is from the fiercest defenders of our Holy Land. And on a personal level, on a personal level, Shmuley's son, Mendy, the bar term from Shmuley, is a soul friend of mine. He's a very, very, very close friend of mine, one of my best friends. And I actually had the bliss to live in Shmuley's house, Shmuley and Rabbi Devi's house, for a couple months. So for me personally, it's heartwarming and very beautiful for them to be here and to meet some of our close friends. And just want to say thank you to the Nussbaum for hosting this beautiful evening, and thank you very much for Rabbi Shmuley for taking time out of his vacation to spread the good word. And just one last thought, it's very interesting, we're here tonight to talk about Israel, and it is interesting to note that Israel is almost the exact antipode of Hawaii. You cannot get farther away from Israel than Hawaii. That's why if you walk down to front streets, you will meet a lot of Israelis. You can't get farther away. Right? But it's interesting that in the Jewish tradition, Israel is the center of the universe, and I believe that the light spreads out over the whole universe, right, to cover the whole world. And Hawaii, being the farthest place away, is almost the most crucial. The point is that the light reaches all the corners. So when we are here now, Tuesday evening, which is already Wednesday morning in Israel, truly it is symbolic, and it's an incredible thing. So once again, thank you to the Nussbaums, thank you to Rabbi Shmuley, and I will now cede the floor to your host, Barry. Thank you so much, and enjoy guys.
Thank you, Rabbi.
We are live.
So welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. We're very honored to have the esteemed Shmuley Boteach in our home. And he's going to deliver some very insightful viewpoints on things that concern Jews and supporters of the Jewish people, especially Israel, tonight. So this is a joint broadcast between Shmuley's organization, which is called
The Will God Does Not Work.
and ours, which is American Truth Project. So we are live around the world right now and broadcasting on Instagram and Facebook. and we'll be editing snippets of this and sending it around the world in the next couple of days. So let's start with your new book. It's called Holocaust Holiday, and it resulted from your amazing family research project that I was blown away when you told me the story the other day. As the son of Holocaust survivors, which I am, someone that goes to Europe and documents the Holocaust is especially important to me personally and my family. My parents, as some of you know, have heard me speak before, were survivors of the most infamous death camp in the history of the human race. They were liberated in January 1945 from Auschwitz. A great number of my family are still there, in the ground in Poland. So I'm very grateful for you to do the research and shine a light on the dark side of human history. So let's start off, Rabbi, if we can, and tell the audience around the world about your new book. It's a fascinating story.
Well, let me begin by thanking all of you for coming out tonight. What an honor to speak in Hawaii. I told my wife, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. She can go back if she wants. I think that anyone who doesn't live in Hawaii really needs to have their heads examined. It's like nothing makes sense. Why wouldn't we all live here?
Yeah.
Like, what is wrong with me that I don't live here?
Yeah.
Seriously, it's like, God almighty, this place is not real. Did I drink too much of Barry's fine whiskey? And this place is too beautiful, too special. And I can't believe it's the United States of America. America's not supposed to be this beautiful. America's supposed to be freezing and snow and... which leads me, first and foremost, to thank Barry and Denise for hosting us this evening in this beautiful home. And I was here yesterday, and Barry and Denise are going to have to move out now that I'm moving in. So if any of you guys want to take them in, I think that would be a very nice gesture. And Barry loves Israel, and he's got a Magen David right up here on his arm, and he's a child of survivors who gets the message that only a strong and assertive Jewish people they're the only ones who can ensure that never again means exactly that, never again. Because for we, the Jewish people, unfortunately, never again has come to mean again and again and again. And we just said it at the Passover Seder. But there's something about our people that they stand up to annihilate us in every generation. The Crusades and the Auto de Fe's and the Spanish expulsion, the Spanish Inquisition, the pogroms and burning at the stake, and God Almighty, it's like they've invented so many different ways to annihilate Jews going back to Roman times. And Khmelnytsky killed 250,000 Jews, 1648, 1649. The Romans killed 1 million Jews in the 66 to 70 revolt, killed another few hundred thousand in the Bar Kokhba revolt 70 years later. I mean, I could go on. We're a nation of tragedy, and yet then we suddenly have the miracle of the state of Israel, who just celebrated its 73rd birthday, thank God, just last week. And Barry gets it. A strong Israel and a strong Jewish identity is how we ensure that never again means precisely that never again. But before I continue and respond directly to Barry's question about my book, Holocaust Holiday, I do want to extend a very special thank you to Chabad of Maui and our very dear friends, Rabbi Medno Krasniansky and Mushka Krasniansky. Rabbi Mendy, who we affectionately call Kraz, is really understating the degree of the relationship. Because he was a Ben Bias, a child of our home. Our son Mendy's closest friend in the whole world. They studied rabbinical ordination together in Pretoria, South Africa. And they actually studied and passed the tests. My rabbinical ordination was easier. I just laser printed a certificate one day and declared myself to be a rabbi. And I'm happy to give any of you one as well, for a small, very reasonable fee. But ever since Mendy and Mendy, the two Mendys met in Pretoria, and I was actually the keynote speaker at the rabbinical ordination ceremony in Pretoria. I was very honored. See, don't tell them that about the laser printed speaker, because that might invalidate yours, and I feel very uncomfortable. Ever since then, Rabbi Mendy Krasniansky was closest family friend and worked with my son, fighting BDS on campus, especially at NYU, where our son was an undergraduate. And NYU is an example of the anti-Israel forces and their success. I want to just tell you that the mathematics are just crazy. NYU has the largest undergraduate student population of any private university in the Jewish student population of any private university in the United States. There are 6,000 Jewish student undergraduates. Those numbers are astronomical. SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, have never numbered more than about 60. So you're talking about 1% of the Jewish students. Who do you think won in the battle for BDS at NYU? Well, of course, it was SJP. They have passed so many anti-Israel resolutions trying to get the university to divest from investments in Israel. And it all comes down to this. The Jewish students weren't standing up. So Rabbi Mendy Krasniansky and our son, Rabbi Mendy Koteach, worked very hard to combat that and did very stellar work. So this is like closing the circle, Kraz, right? That I come here to Maui and refuse to leave and do pro-Israel events. Yeah. And I would ask that since Kraz and his wife Mushka are relatively new here, just a few years, with their 2 children, I would really ask all of you to support their work, because Hawaii is perfect in every sense for we Jews, but one, which is we have to have much stronger Jewish life. You have Rabbi Krasiansky's mother is here, and Rebbetzin Krasiansky and her husband Ishel have set up Chabad in Hawaii more than 3 decades ago. Right? How many years is it now?
33 and a half of this country.
33 and a half. And I just want to say, for a couple and the Krasianskys are world famous for their Jewish work here in Hawaii. For people to sacrifice so much to live in Hawaii. The degree of sacrifice they probably have given for the Jewish, the martyrdom, the sheer martyrdom. No, but seriously speaking, not only do I personally salute everything the Krasiansky family has done here in Hawaii, but my daughter Shayna lived with the Krasianskys for a year on Oahu and Honolulu and worked her guts out. And she is now Rebbetzin Krasiansky's niece, because my daughter married her nephew. Yeah, so we're mishpacha, quite literally. Their whole kind of reputatious family came down a notch or two when they married into our family. But what the hell, The party was fun. The wedding was fun. So I want to salute everything that you do, and I hope that all of you will support Chabad of Maui and get behind Jewish life, build Jewish life, stand up for Israel, stand up for strong Jewish identity. And Chabad needs support. It survives. Chabad, its whole strength is its decentralization. It survives specifically from having people who are local, who see the need for shul and kosher food and pro-Israel celebrations and all the life cycle events and Jewish intellectual life and Jewish social life and Jewish emotional life, and it's critical. And I've learned this myself because one of the reasons I'm here, aside from, as I said, to displace Barry and Denise and the dogs. I will keep the dogs, I think. But one of the reasons I'm here is my father passed away a year ago, almost a year ago, and I went through the 11 months of Kaddish 3 times a day. Thank God I did not miss a single Kaddish, even through the coronavirus. I had organized my own minyanim, and I took the Kaddish responsibility very seriously for my father. My father was born in Isfahan in 1932. He died last year at the age of 87 on May the 23rd, on the Jewish date of Vav, the Rosh Chodesh Sivan, which means that my 11 months of Kaddish just ended this past Thursday. On Israel's Independence Day, which was by providential design, my father loved Israel. If he would have known that the last Kaddish I said for him was Israel, especially because Israel's Independence Day was brought forward 2 days this year. This year it was on Gimel Iyar, the 3rd day. It's supposed to be the 5th day of Iyar. But because it ended up on the Shabbat, and Israel didn't want people having barbecues or driving and desecrating the Shabbat, so as to make it a holier occasion, they moved Israel's Independence Day forward by 2 days, making my last Kaddish on Israel's Independence Day. And the 70th Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo, came to our home and gave a lecture outside. We did it socially distanced outside. The wow, I'm getting permissions in New York to do any kind of event right now. But look it online. He gave an incredible speech about the danger of the Iran negotiations taking place in Vienna, Iran Deal 2. Iran Deal 1 was bad enough. JCPOA was really an American abomination because we are the greatest country in the world, the United States of America. We are the land of the free, we're the home of the brave. We don't give $150 billion to criminals and terrorists. We don't legitimize the nuclear program of nations that stone gay men and women to death or hang them from cranes in city squares. We don't give $150 billion to people who stone women to death. And you know how it works in Iran. A man who wants to get divorced can simply accuse his wife of infidelity, and then she is guilty until proven innocent. So the burden, the onus of innocence is placed on her. And if she is found to be guilty, again, she has to prove that she's innocent. They dig her in a hole, as many of you may have seen from the true story of the stoning of Soraya M. in that movie that was made based on the real-life account of a French journalist. They put you into a ditch, they lock your arms, and your male issue have to be the first to cast the stones. And they throw these big boulders, and they smash your brains in because you're a woman. And this great nation gave that country $150 billion in unfrozen assets. I want you to know how much money that is. Because you have even friends of Israel, like Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, who are opposed to any form of foreign aid. Israel gets $3.3 billion a year, and Egypt's getting $2 billion a year. And Rand Paul's pro-Israel, but he just says Israel doesn't need the money against foreign aid. Okay, that's $3 billion a year. It would take Israel 50 years to get what Iran got from the Obama administration. 50 years to give these killers money. And when we heard that they were sending them billions of dollars, quite literally in cash, on American military transports, I mean, this stuff cannot be invented. It boggles the imagination. So when Mike Pompeo, by the way, arrived, so we did a Torah school for my father, and Pompeo did one of the last letters holding the scribe's hand, and he came with massive security. And he's a former secretary, massive security. But you know, the Trump administration took out Qasem Soleimani, the world's foremost terrorist, the head of the Al-Quds Revolutionary Guard. And so all these people have to be seriously protected because Iran are cold-blooded killers. And in their demented worldview, where one Holocaust was not enough and we need Holocaust 2, and Israel is threatened with annihilation every single day, and Israel is called a cancer and a tumor. And this is by a United Nations nation state, which is officially a signatory to the 1948 Anti-Genocide Convention, which makes it a crime in international law to use any genocidal rhetoric to threaten any nation with annihilation, and Iran gets away with it constantly. And you have to ask yourself, President Biden, who's been a friend of the Jewish community, see, I say, the Biden's a nice guy, you have to feel that. You know, and President, was that like intentional? But President Biden, who's been a friend of the Jewish community for 50 years, I've met Biden on several times at pro-Israel events, was always a great friend of the Jewish community. And I have to almost make an appeal to our president. I mean, God Almighty, Mr. President, you're a moral man. You're talking to Iran in Vienna before you force them to repudiate their guarantees that they're going to kill every Jew in the Middle East. I mean, for God's sake, that is immoral. I mean, today, listen, hopefully this country will experience some racial healing now that a jury, an impartial jury, has rendered a verdict in the Derek Chauvin. And God Almighty, who knows what would have happened had it gone in a different direction. There's peace in the United States tonight. Thank God. We should abolish every form of racial injustice. But imagine if Iran had threatened all of the world's black men and women with annihilation. Would the United States have given them $150 billion? Of course not. Would we have signed it? Would we be talking to them? But you can threaten the Jews constantly with murder and nothing happens. And you know why? Because we allow it to happen. Because we allow it to happen. At a gala that we just did recently, my organization, the World Values Network, we do these galas every year, and this year was dedicated to African American Jewish Brotherhood. So I invited, and I got heavily criticized for it, I invited Alicia Garza to be one of the honorees. So some of our honorees were Steve Harvey, Dionne Warwick, you know, legends. And then I invited Alicia Garza. Who's Alicia Garza? So Alicia Garza is a 40-year-old woman who went by the name of Alicia Schwartz until she was 21, and she is the co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. She actually invented the hashtag. And she considers herself a Jewish woman until today, and I invited her, she accepted, and she came under ferocious criticism, especially from Linda Sarsour for having accepted my invitation, and she pulled out, which saddened me tremendously, because I wrote to her and I said, we don't have to agree on everything. I know Black Lives Matter is very critical of Israel, but let's begin with the basics, that blacks and Jews are brothers. We're all children of God, under God. But she pulled out. Okay. And the Black Lives Matter movement was a seminal event in the American political experience where black men and women being shot by police, the community around the world, white and black, stood up and said, we're going to march and this isn't going to happen anymore. And I look at our community where a Jewish Lives Matter hashtag has never caught on, and where Iran can threaten to kill us, and where Israel is demonized, and where Jewish life, remember, 11 Jews were murdered just 3 years ago in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, and then Poway, California, and I could go on, and from right and left, from the right-wing nutcases, the white supremacists and neo-Nazis that want to murder us, to the left-wing pro-BDS, anti-Israel, let Israel be destroyed. I mean, we're being pincered, and we frickin' let this stuff happen. I just don't get it. Where is Jewish pride? Which brings me, after a very long-winded, which brings me to Holocaust Holiday. You know, Barry, I wrote Holocaust Holiday because I wanted my kids to get it. You know, you picked me up yesterday on my little bike, and we hit it off instantly because we had this thing in common. You're not just a child of survivors, you're a child of survivors whose children have served in the IDF. Your son was promoted to sergeant yesterday. God bless him, he's a Jewish-American hero. When I was running for Congress in 2012, and my daughter was serving as a soldier in the IDF, and like my opponent was saying, what the hell? You're running for Congress, and your daughter is serving in a foreign military. So Prime Minister Netanyahu, who my wife had known for a long time, invited me to a meeting. I went to Jerusalem, and he invited my daughter, and she's wearing this beautiful picture of her in her uniform. And Prime Minister Netanyahu says to the media that's there, he says, I want Rabbi Shmuley to know that his daughter, that I'm specifically responding to that criticism, his daughter serving in the IDF is one of the best ways to protect the United States of America. Because, of course, the terrorism starts in Israel. The Jews are the canary in the coal mine. Then it ends up incinerating 3,000 Americans on 9/11. So Israel, and how much intelligence does Israel share with the United States? Right. And so Israel's America's foremost ally, not just in the Middle East, but anywhere in the world. Right. So I wrote this book because I feel the way you feel, that my kids need to know, they need to experience what happened to our people. That between the years of 1941 to 1945, 10,000 Jews a day were murdered for 4 years. So President Biden says, I'm taking all American troops out of Afghanistan by September, America's longest war of 20 years. That was after 3,000 Americans were killed in one day. We're about to commemorate the 20th anniversary of 9/11. The Jews had 3 9/11s a day for 4 years. 3 9/11s a day. Our life has become so trivial, so meaningless, that these numbers don't make sense to us. Your parents were Hungarian Jews. That was the fastest slaughter of humanity in the history of the world. 550,000 killed in 3 months, exceeded only by the Rwandan genocide of 1994, which was 880,000 in 3 months. And my family and I visited Rwanda many times to work with our Rwandan brothers and sisters on their genocide commemoration and memory. But the SS hit a record with Hungarian Jews in August of 1944. They killed 40,000 Hungarian Jews in a single day. And I'm tired of Jewish life being worthless. As a Jew, I'm no better than anyone, and I'm no worse than anyone. I'm an equal child of God. So how the heck are we allowing all this to happen? Where is our voice? Where is Jewish pride? Where is Jewish identity? And let me tell you something. You know, Spike Lee did a great job in his outstanding movie, Malcolm X. And my wife and I are family. We're friendly with Malcolm X. His daughter has been to our house to Shabbos dinner many times. If you saw the movie Malcolm X, he does an excellent job showing Malcolm X's journey. He started like so many African-American men, almost like embarrassed to be black because our African-American brothers and sisters were enslaved, brutalized, slaughtered, murdered. So you begin to internalize the hatred. You start saying there must be something wrong with me. So in the movie he shows he wanted to straighten his hair, he wanted to bleach his skin, he wanted to not be black. And then of course it changes. And he becomes a very strong black nationalist and a great spokesman for his people. You can agree, disagree on a lot of his career. What you can't disagree is the pride he showed in being an American black man. And I wonder to myself whether the Jewish community has gone through the same kind of osmosis, same kind of transformation. Because we've internalized 2,000 years of hatred. And you know how we respond to it? We change our names. We hate we make jokes about unique Jewish characteristics. Jewish women especially pay a very big price, as if Jewish women are not as pretty as Gentile women. All of this kind of self-hatred, which is just garbage and stupid, and it's not how the non-Jewish world sees us. They think Jewish women are gorgeous. And they think Jews should have tremendous pride in a glorious tradition. Evangelical Christians really believe that we are God's chosen people, even as we continually say, nah, not really chosen. I don't think that we've gone through the same osmosis of this transformation from shame to pride. I don't know when it's going to happen. And I think that's one of the reasons that Israel, and I'll conclude with this, Barry, you love Israel and your kids are assertive the IDF. And by the way, that's the greatest way to discern whether someone's real or they're a faker in the pro-Israel community. Your kids go to the IDF, that's damn hard. We've had 2 children in the IDF, we have a third going out, and it's really hard. It's hard. No one wants to see their kids in the military. You know, the U.S. military is the greatest force for good on planet Earth, period. What the U.S. military does, and what they've done fighting the Taliban, my very close friend Brett Stevens of the New York Times wrote a brilliant column yesterday, an appeal to President Biden saying, okay, you want to get out of Afghanistan, we get it, but you do realize the Taliban will be back in 6 months. And all these women, Malala, I mean, they're goners. At least let them in the United States before they're just slaughtered, killed. Any girl that had a Western education, went to university, they're going to be killed. So, with the U.S. military being the greatest force of good in the world, but knowing that the Israeli army is just like on the front lines every day. In the U.S., you need to be deployed to be on the front lines. And the idea if you're on the day that you're on the front lines just by where you live, even citizenry are on the front lines. It's very hard, so I really salute that tremendously. But I know that we need to do so much more to instill this sense of pride and to kind of fight back. And to make sure that Jews don't have to feel ashamed of who they are and actually have pride in who they are and have pride in Israel. But what I want to say is that I actually feel that Israel is beginning to move away from American Jewry. Everyone's saying the opposite. People that I've debated, like Peter Beinart, he actually wrote in the New York Times there shouldn't even be a Jewish state anymore. I mean, okay. But people like Peter Beinart are saying, oh, American Jews are moving away from Israel because they can't stand the persecution of the Palestinians and that Israel's an apartheid state. I think the opposite is what's really happening. Israeli Jews are beginning to move away because they're saying, we just don't get these American Jews. Like, why do they turn on Israel? Like, how is it that 80% of Americans opposed the Iran deal in 2015? Only 20% of Americans, the mainstream U.S. population. Because Americans can't stand Iran. They remember what they did to our hostages. They weren't Jews, they were Americans. Some were Jews, but they were Americans. But in the Jewish community, 50% supported the Iran deal. And the Israelis, they just don't get it. Or all the Jews, oh, you know, I'm Jewish, but I don't support everything about the Netanyahu government. Okay, what does that have to do with supporting Israel? Israelis are really mystified by American Jewish lack of commitment. I'm sometimes mystified by it as well. I meet, you know, I'm close to the Armenian American community, and I worked with them in 2016, the centenary of the Armenian genocide. Our organization took out full-page ads in the New York Times to commemorate the Armenian genocide. They're very proud. They want the Armenian genocide recognized. As I said, the African American, I can go through the different communities. And then you come to the American Jewish community, and it's just strange. Rates of assimilation. But above all else, the lack of pride in Israel. Israel's a miracle. To remain a democracy in the Middle East, to have one of our close friends, my wife and I's close friends, family's close friends, is Amir Ohana, Israel's police minister, who's openly gay. And we brought him to this big dinner in New York because he was the first LGBT minister in any Middle Eastern government's history. I mean, just imagine if we said, yeah, first LGBT minister in Saudi Arabia. I was thinking, or first in Dubai, first openly gay. Right? I mean, you laugh, right? This guy is Israel's police minister. And I'm so proud of Israel. And we Jews should be proud of Israel. It's an extraordinary country, even though we live in life.
Okay, let me ask you some questions.
Yeah.
So let's talk specifics, Rabbi.
Can I say l'chaim during this?
Of course you can.
Okay.
If you say it with me,
L'chaim.
okay. There's an infamous anchor at CNN named Christiane Amanpour. She has been an enemy of Israel since CNN put her on the air. Everybody knows it. What I'm going to ask you about specifically is a recent segment that she did on her show about Marwan Barghouti. For those of you that don't know, Marwan Barghouti is serving life plus 40 years, actually 4 life sentences plus 40 years for a number of murders in Israel. He is an unrepentant terrorist. He's a mass murderer. And when you talk about somebody like that, who provided guns, ammunition, planning, and carried out the murders, and was tried in court, he killed so many people, he'll be in prison for hundreds of years if he was to live that long. So what does this reporter call him? He's an activist that has been jailed by the Israelis. So if you listen to a newscast and you're not Shmuley or me and you don't know the story, you think, oh, the guy was jaywalking. Or maybe he was an embezzler. He's a mass murderer. And CNN puts their lead foreign reporter on the air, and she calls him an activist. So my question, Shmuley, what's wrong with CNN? Why do they so hate Israel?
Well, as someone who's appeared on many CNN shows and who actually admires many of their hosts, I don't think there's anything wrong with CNN per se. I would say there's something wrong with a more liberal mindset as it confronts evil. I've been in liberal political circles my entire life, much more than conservative political circles, because I was a rabbi at Oxford University for 11 years, one of the most liberal cities on earth. And then I worked in media, much more liberal than conservative. So conservatives have their shortcomings and liberals have their shortcomings. What's the great progressive shortcoming? It's a refusal to hate evil. So often evil is kind of excused. So for example, if a Palestinian suicide bomber is going to blow himself up on an Israeli bus, we so often used to hear, well, what do you expect? Israeli military checkpoints. What do you expect? The economic degradation. And Alan Dershowitz made the excellent point, no one was ever more degraded in human history than the Jews of, say, the Warsaw Ghetto, the Łódź Ghetto. They didn't blow up, even if you were to, they didn't blow up German kindergartens. That's just a horrible excuse. We refuse to hate evil. So along comes Christiane Amanpour, and she's sitting, we're talking about with someone who is the epitome of evil, like you said, an unrepentant terrorist, a mass murderer. Instead of seeing for what he is, I believe that no one is born good and no one is born evil. We're all born innocent. It's a point that my dear friend and many of your admirers here, Dennis Prager, has always made. Judaism believes we're born innocent. But your actions will determine if you're good or evil. When you kill many people, you're not someone who murdered, you are a murderer. It's an intrinsic, inextricable part of your character. Christiane Amanpour refuses to hate evil. She's going to find humanity, some spark of the divine in this guy. He's someone, like you said, an activist. Maybe he's even a freedom fighter. That's where we get into this terrible morass of losing our moral compass and not being able to make statements about things that are good and evil. And it's happened throughout the 20th century. This is why.
But why no correction? Why no standard of truthfulness where there is an objective standard of what is evil and what is not? How can you call a mass murderer serving what amounts to 500 years in prison an activist?
Well, I'll tell you the reason. It's our fault. Because if the Jewish community expressed ferocious outrage at that kind of moral fog, and that kind of, it's more than a fog, it's a moral sin, they wouldn't do it. I'll give you an example. Before the verdict against Derek Chauvin, the President of the United States called the family of George Floyd and said that the evidence against Chauvin is overwhelming. Now, you have to debate whether that was even a smart move, because that could maybe lead, as the judge himself said about Maxine Waters, can lead directly to an appeal. But why did the president do that? Because the president knew that if Chauvin is going to get off, there is going to be so much hell to pay in the United States, because the African American community is going to say, not this time, like, what the hell? We have put up with this so many times. So he preemptively made that phone call. because if anyone calls Derek Chauvin simply, you know, a police officer who made a mistake, you say that about him in the media today, you'll probably be canceled. But you can say that Barghouti, who's infinitely worse, because this guy was a premeditated killer who killed many, you can call him an activist or a freedom fighter and get away with it because of the silence of the Jewish community. That's why I said, I believe we have so much to learn from our African American brothers and sisters who kind of don't put up with this. She can say it because we allow her to say it.
Well said. Let's pivot back to the JCPOA. As you and I have discussed, I was very involved when President Obama first proposed it. I was very active opposing it, as were you, for the reasons, some of which you've stated. I consider it the worst deal in American diplomatic history. I consider it on par with Neville Chamberlain going to meet with Hitler when Hitler seized the Rhineland from Czechoslovakia, and England gave it to him in exchange for a promise of, I don't want any more territory, I'm a peaceful guy. And a year later, he invaded Poland and World War II started. Every single thing Obama promised the American people turned out to be a lie. Just as a reference point, because I'm a specialist in this deal, so to speak. Obama promised we will be able to inspect every site in Iran without preconditions. That was a lie. We will be able to go in without notice. That was a lie. We will prevent Iran from ever having nuclear weapons. Not only was that a lie, the deal guaranteed nuclear weapons to Iran. We will work hard and guarantee that Iran will never build delivery systems for nuclear weapons, long-range ballistic missiles, also called ICBMs. That was a lie. Iran will stop exporting terror, and we will guarantee it. That was a lie. Every single thing he made in that famous Rose Garden speech turned out to be a lie. As you said, when the Congress and the American people opposed the deal, what did he do? He made the deal anyway and didn't call it a treaty because that would have required the Senate's confirmation. He just did it. Trump did the right thing. He said, they took the billions, they took the cash that we delivered on military transports in numerous currencies from around the world, in every currency in the world, and they spent it on terror, they spent it on missiles, they spent it on nuclear arms development, and then he put sanctions on it. The government is that close to collapsing right now. And now they're ready to make a deal, except Biden took everything off the table. And the money is flowing, the deal is going to be made, they're already negotiating, there's already a framework agreement between the United States and Iran. Iran will be welcomed back into the League of Nations, so to speak, on the world stage, and we backtrack all the progress Trump made. What the heck in the world is President Biden thinking, Rabbi Shmuley? I dig you a hole.
No, we're just getting started. First, let's be clear about President Biden. America is totally partisan, divided. There's too much hatred in this country. And I believe that God gave me a brain. It may not be the world's greatest brain. Maybe Einstein's was better, maybe. But I have to exercise my values and my intelligence in determining my position on the issues. But what I'm not going to do is just join a side. There was a lot that President Obama did that was good for the Jewish community and for American-Israel relations. He increased foreign aid just before he left office. He visited Israel, and it was seen as a very successful visit. When Netanyahu was prime minister, it was much welcomed by the Israeli people. When Elie Wiesel died, and I was very close to Elie Wiesel, he referred to him as the conscience of the world. The problem is that the JCPOA, which is called the Iran deal, it unfortunately undermined so much of Obama's, the morality of his foreign policy, for one simple reason. We can debate different issues, and there are two sides to most things, and that's the way it should be. I don't want to live in China, it's a one-party state. I don't want to live in Russia, which is a one-party state. The problem is that with genocide, there are no two sides. We all have to oppose genocide. Let me show you how seriously I take this. Even Israel, whom we love and whom we fight for, Israel has made a terrible mistake not recognizing the Armenian genocide, all in an effort to placate a Jew-hating dictator by the name of Erdogan in Turkey. The United States has also not recognized the Armenian genocide. Strangely enough, France is more moral on the Armenian genocide than the United States, their parliament having recognized it. But the United States still feels we need Erdogan in the fight against terrorism, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc. But that's wrong. Genocide it's the red line. Mass murder is the red line. It's the red line that Obama himself said. He said, I can handle most of what Assad is doing in Syria except mass murder, weapons of mass destruction, that's the red line. Then, of course, he violated his own red line and turned over those weapons of mass destruction to Putin. You can't even make this stuff up to get rid of them. We know how that ended. It ended with our children foaming at the mouth from mustard sarin gas in Aleppo and in Damascus. That's the issue of the Iran deal. The issue with the Iran deal is that if Obama or Rand Paul or any Republican would come along and say, you know what, America's terrible economy right now, coronavirus, we're not giving Israel money anymore. That doesn't mean you're anti-Israel. We're not going to fund Iron Dome. We're not going to fund Israel's Arrow missile system. It doesn't mean you're anti-Israel. But when you give Iran who's threatening a Holocaust, I heard Mike Pence use those words in the Warsaw Security Conference. I was in the same room. That Iran is actually threatening a Holocaust. And even the Trump State Department, the State Department, not Pompeo, had an issue, you were not authorized to, but that's what they're planning. When you say we're going to annihilate Israel, that's saying Holocaust too. That was the problem with Iran.
So what is Biden thinking?
So to Biden's credit, he has not yet, unlike Obama, he has not yet lifted sanctions against Iran, thank God. And he said officially that he will not lift sanctions as an inducement to talks. Now, if he keeps his word, that's pretty cool. If he breaks his word, and if he lifts sanctions, and I can't imagine that Iran's going to stay in those talks like one more week unless the sanctions are lifted, that's the only reason they're there, is to save their economy, then we're back to Obama-era policies vis-a-vis Iran. And as you said, not only did it backfire, but it gave Iran hegemony over the Middle East, and they took over 5 Middle Eastern capitals.
Yeah, but let's talk about how bad it really is. Because, as the world knows, in the last few days, allegedly, although it hasn't been confirmed, the Mossad planted a bomb in the Natanz electrical conduit system that cut off the power and the backup power to all the advanced centrifuges that are right now, as we sit here, enhancing uranium, not for power, not for research, not for medical purposes, for only one reason: developing nuclear weapons and the ability to fission uranium. There's no other reason to go to the level they have, and they're bragging about it.
Of course.
Supposedly, the
Their
Mossad...
nuclear program is about making a weapon, period.
There's no question on anybody's radar screen anymore. All the euphemisms, well, it's medical research, well, we're going to run out of oil in 800 years, so we should start a nuclear program now, blah, blah, blah. Now, they've actually just said it. We're going to do whatever we want, and no one can stop us from nuclear weapons. Unfortunately,
We're negotiating with them if that's the case. If that's so obvious, then how can the United States of America be negotiating with an enemy, hostile country who is clearly developing nuclear
Right, and
weapons?
that's Barry's question.
the Robertson is taking my question.
Before you answer, could you just repeat it?
Sure.
Thank you, because I don't think I got it.
Barry, that's your excellent
Yeah,
question.
my question is the same as yours.
How can-
Why is the United States, as a policy coming from the White House now, engaging in dialogue with a country that A, is still promising to kill every Jew? In fact, they've made the comment that's so audacious, they love the fact that there's a Jewish homeland. And why do they love that there's a Jewish homeland? Because there's an ingathering of the Jews in one place, so it's easier to kill them all rather than have to go around the world. They've actually said that. on
Right,
numerous
it's a
occasions.
total reversal of Herzl's vision of Zionism.
Right.
Because Herzl's vision was Jews are hated throughout Europe, around the world. They need their own country to protect it. So Iran inverted it and said, oh great, let's embrace the Herzlian vision, because now they all are in one place, they are now a one-bomb state.
Yep.
So why is the United States speaking to them? because this is where diplomats, not guided by a moral sense of right and wrong, become way too clever. They think, you know what? We alone can change them. We, like President Obama thought, I'm going to change them. And everyone said to Obama, you know what? These guys have been negotiating deals and outsmarting Westerners for 2,000 years. It's the one thing they're really good at. They are going to get the better of you. And look at the tattered legacy over Iran. Because everything Obama said would happen, which is that when Iran was brought in from the cold, in the community of nations, they would mollify and modify their behavior. They became 1,000 times worse. 1,000 times worse. And all of the predictions that were made about Trump's action in foreign policy, if you move the embassy, there'll be, outbreak of the Arab Stream. None of that happened. So everything that Obama said would happen did not happen. Iran became a terrible, or worse, as if it could be worse, on the world stage in the Middle East. And everything that they said that if Trump recognizes the Golden Heights, if Trump takes us out of Iran, there'll be all of this. Or if he kills Qasem Soleimani. We were told, you kill Qasem Soleimani, Americans are going to die all over the place. Instead, Iran got the message. Now, when you speak about Israel and Mossad and Natanz, today's New York Times on page 1 has a fascinating story, if anyone saw it, that the Mossad is operating almost with impunity in Iran, just blowing people to hell, where these scientists go directly to roast on a spit forever and ever, because they have, this is mad science. This is like, this is Nazi-era science, the violation of science, using it to build weapons to kill children. So Israel's blowing these people up. Like the Natanz thing is incredible. They blew up all these centrifuges 2 days ago, and apparently it was in a desk that was brought in like a year ago, and the explosives, Israel was just waiting to push the button. Wow. And interestingly, I guess they pushed the button the day that the United States sent its Secretary of Defense to tell Israel, listen, don't criticize this deal. And Israel, I guess Israel's decided we can get along with our great ally, the U.S., up to a point, but no more Iran deals. Yeah. I was in the Congress when Bibi gave that speech. My wife and I were in the room. We physically brought Elia, Mary, and Wiesel to that speech. And everyone said, terrible move, that Bibi's destroyed, polarized U.S.-Israel relations. How can you go against the President of the United States? There was some truth to that. The Prime Minister of a country this big coming to the world superpower and speaking truth to power. But I had great pride in that room, not just as a Jew, but as an American. I wanted to hear someone tell the United States of America, remind us of what we represent. We're on the side of the underdog. We're on the side of the Jews who've been slaughtered and murdered. And now, what the hell did we ever do to the Iranians that they want to kill us? The other day, in the presence of Secretary Pompeo, if you watch my speech, so he's here, I'm introducing him, and I spoke about Iran, because the whole reason we were having this Torah completed was for my father's memory. My father was born in Iran. My father was born in Isfahan, and my father helped endow a synagogue in the city of Isfahan, and he actually went to the laying of the foundation stone, like whatever, it was 12 years ago. Spent 3 weeks there. I was very upset that he went. I don't know if he'd ever come back. Now the shul was finished, and 3 years ago he wanted to travel there, and it led to a huge fight between me and I said, Abba, you cannot go to Iran. He said, I'm an old man, they're going to leave me alone. I said, no, not even old men. You can be kidnapped like that. These are monsters, this regime. So what did we, the Jews, do to the Iranians that they want to annihilate? What the hell did we do to them? This hatred, this disgusting, abominable hatred. And it should be condemned. And I've got to tell you something, Barry. The best answer I have to your question of why we're talking to them is, I don't want Biden to explain it. I don't want this administration to explain it. I want them to do the right thing. Don't explain it to us. Stop. Go to Iran and say, look, we want to talk, we want to deal. Listen, even the Trump administration said they wanted a deal. Pompeo said he wanted a deal. They just wanted the right deal. The right deal is a total cessation of all nuclear work in Iran now and forever, because they cannot be trusted with nuclear technology, like North Korea. There's nothing we can do about North Korea. It's too late.
And what do? We put the same person in charge of the negotiations that did the North Korean deal.
Wendy Sherman.
Wendy Sherman for President Clinton, which was a complete disaster, and we hired her back, and she works for Biden. So, on a corollary, there was a miracle in the last couple of years in the Middle East. It's called the Abraham Accords. The Sunni states that had sworn to destroy Israel as part of their religious fervor, specifically the Gulf states, are making deals with Israel. The planes are flying back and forth between the UAE. Israel can fly into Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. These states are scared to death of the Shia regime that wants to overthrow every single one of their governments. So they, without United States support anymore, are now aligned with Israel. The military, the intelligence, and the economic cooperation between Israel and the Gulf states, the Sunni Gulf states, is unparalleled in world history. And what are we doing as a country? We're turning our back on those countries. We're turning our back on the treaty that Trump did that he deserves the Nobel Prize for. It's a miracle. It truly is. I never thought I would see something like this in my lifetime. I remember sitting with the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations some years ago, and he said, this was about 7, 8 years ago, he said, you know, we're talking to Saudi Arabia. It's a secret. No one will ever know. Now, we're discussing trade with them. We're discussing intelligence. I'm talking about
Israeli
Israel.
planes are flying over Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. There's exchange of commerce. The investments are billions and billions are going back and forth. And the Biden administration doesn't want to talk to the Sunni states, doesn't want to talk to Israel about it, doesn't want to validate the Abraham Accords. They want to talk to Iran, who is the avowed enemy of every Gulf state. Here's my question. Is it going to be the Gulf states and Israel against Iran alone? And if so, where does the United States put itself?
Well, let's just remember, as I said earlier, that the overwhelming majority of Americans were opposed to the Iran deal.
They still are.
That's why President Obama could not pass it as it should have been passed, which was as an arms limitation treaty. It is an arms limitation treaty, and it should have been passed with 2/3 of the Senate, as the Constitution calls, or demands. Instead, it was passed as a presidential directive, and that's when Senator Tom Cotton famously wrote an open letter to Khamenei saying, you can sign this, but it's a worthless piece of paper, because the next president, with the same stroke of a pen, will remove it, which is exactly what happened.
And Iran never signed it, by the way.
And they never signed the deal, yes. So, the question for me is not whether the Gulf states will be left alone to fend against Iran with Israel if the United States and this administration kind of abandons them by, once again, promoting Iran as they did with the JCPOA. The real question to me is whether the American people are going to stand for a second Iran deal. The American people know who Iran is. It's the one country, North Korea, we kind of, the Korean War was a long time ago. We also know there's 30,000 American troops in Korea. We're not as familiar with the behavior of Kim Jong-un as we are with Iran. We know about the Green Revolution. Americans watched it happen in 2009. We saw people shot in the streets. We know that Iran has a disgusting record on LGBT rights, on women's rights. And we know, of course, that modern-day Islamic terrorism started in 1979 with Khomeini and with the capturing of our hostages at the embassy. So the real question for me is whether the American people are going to let this fly. I'd like to see the American people. And this should not be the fight of the Jewish community. Iran hates Israel. Iran doesn't hate America because America supports Israel. Iran hates Israel because they see it as an American-style democracy inside the Middle East. A Western American decadence. Israel's only the little Satan. America is the big Satan. Most of the chants aren't even death to the Jews. Most of the chants are death to America. So, empowering Iran with ballistic missiles and with a nuclear program endangers the United States. And for those of you who think, well, America's kind of invulnerable, the one thing that Hawaii knows is that America's never invulnerable. You come to Hawaii for the beautiful scenery and the gorgeous beaches, and you kind of forget that the greatest conflagration in the history of the world started here in Hawaii. Yes, the Second World War had started in 1939, and yes, it was 2 years later when Pearl Harbor was attacked. But that's really what made it into a world war. On these sleepy islands, where not much happens except you can buy great coffee and pineapples and stay at overpriced hotels that are beautiful, this is the place that was attacked. And so it's the residents of Hawaii who understand it above all else, that Japan would have crossed the world's largest ocean to attack these, it wasn't even a state in the territory, with such stealth. And the United States did not want to go to war. Remember, Roosevelt did everything to try to get America to support Britain against, and he couldn't do it. There was no American will to fight the Nazis. That changed in one day, December 7th, 1941. So we know what these countries are capable of, and first attacks, etc., etc. And they could be self-annihilatory. Would Iran be destroyed if they attacked the United States? Probably in all likelihood they'd be destroyed, which would be a terrible thing because there's so many innocent people in Iran who have this horrible regime that are destroying their lives. But how many Americans would die before that would happen? God forbid, especially if there was a first strike nuclear capability. And this isn't just fear-mongering. These people are crazy. And they are murderers. And they are theologically crazy. They think that God is going to reward them for killing innocent people. And they have to be stopped.
European countries, specifically the EU, has entered into a time where they are meddling inside Israeli commerce by actually finding stores and vendors in the EU countries who distribute products that say, product of Israel, made in Israel. If it's coming from across the green line, that's a crime in Europe. In other words, the European countries are deciding where the borders should be between Israel and the surrounding areas, regardless of whether or not that land was originally granted to Israel in any one of 3 or 4 different treaties. I'm speaking specifically of Judea and Samaria, where my children are today. I was shocked to read in the last couple of days that shop owners in several European countries are now being fined for distributing products that don't say Palestinian territories on them. Why is there so much meddling from the Europeans into the internal borders of Israel, which it's none of their business? And yet they ignore things, as you mentioned earlier, Rabbi, like the Rwandan genocide, or the mass genocide in China, or the way Russia treats its people, killing all the political opposition leaders and so on, which everybody knows about. Why the obsession with Israel by the Europeans?
Well, they had a 2,000-year-old obsession. It's not new. 2,000 years of Christian anti-Judaism morphed before the Holocaust into modern racial anti-Semitism. Let me just repeat that. 2,000 years of Christian anti-Judaism morphed into racial anti-Semitism. When you identify a minority for 2,000 years as Christ killers, well, little by little they become so hated that even when religion recedes, and Europe today is mostly godless, for the most part, Catholicism is now a Latin American religion, an African religion, no longer really a European religion, but that stain remains. To the credit of our evangelical Christian friends, they acknowledge it, and they have gone the opposite direction in becoming Israel's greatest supporters and friends. The Catholic religion, the Catholic Church has come halfway with great men like John Paul II, even Pope Francis. Pope Francis is excellent on the Jewish question, not as excellent on the Israel question. They love bifurcating between, Israel and the Jewish people. But Europe has a 2,000-year history. They, of course, have no moral credibility on any of the Jewish issues. It's almost laughable when Europe speaks out about Israel. I want to tell you how laughable it can become. I wrote an article about 4 or 5 years ago. There was an effort in Germany to ban circumcision. They wanted to protect these beautiful Jewish baby boys being born in Germany from the horrors of circumcision, the barbarity of circumcision. So I wrote this column, and I basically said, we really appreciate how much Germany cares about the little Jewish babies. We know, their history has shown that they will do everything to protect them. And we horrible Jews, what we do to our own children, we should never be trusted, of course. We should trust the Germans to protect these Jewish kids. It becomes the stuff of humor. Germany is now stepping in to protect Jewish children from their horrible parents. But I have to tell you, things have happened, Barry, over the past year that have changed the whole calculus on BDS and on Europe. Because, first of all, on BDS, what destroyed BDS more than anything else wasn't even the efforts all of us made on campuses, or what destroyed BDS on BDS was the Abraham Accords. If all the Sunni Arab states in the Gulf region, most of whom were funding the Palestinian Authority, are now welcoming tens of thousands of Israeli tourists and investing so heavily in Israeli tech, and BDS has been dealt a death blow. We're not even hearing about BDS, thank God, except on American campuses. And then the EU's in big trouble, and I say that with, we lived in the EU for 11 years when the UK was still part of the EU. The coronavirus has brought devastation. It's terrible. It's terrible what's happening. The EU just botched the whole vaccine thing. The United States has vaccinated 30% of its adult population. Israel is 60 or 70%. The EU, like, 10%. The EU is a mess right now. So they have really big problems, and that's why Israel is falling off their radar screen. Because the Jews are a great distraction usually. Hating Jews is a great way to make people forget your own failures, but when the failures are so glaring and evident, like with the coronavirus, the EU is a mess. And they botched it, and people are dying for no reason. We now see that the EU cannot function as a commonwealth of nations because it cannot have a coherent response to the coronavirus. It can't distribute the vaccines. Israel went early to Pfizer, to Moderna, and said, gave all the reasons why they should get vaccines. The EU had 1 million times more money and clout, and they didn't do the same thing. And so you see what a great industrious entrepreneurial country Israel is, and just how backward and messed up the EU is, and how many innocent people are dying, and how many businesses are shut down because they just botched it. So right now, it's not a question of what the EU is doing to Israel, it's what Israel can do to help save the EU. Bringing their know-how, especially about the coronavirus, to save the EU.
When Nikki Haley was our ambassador to the UN, I was so proud of the United States, the way she would stand up for Israel, the way she would stand up against anti-Semitism. She was not only forceful, but she was brilliant in the way she spoke. The UN ambassador we have now, the new ambassador representing Biden, started off her speech in her first several days apologizing for the racist past of the United States and for the colonialist nature of the United States. And she, in my opinion, made a speech reminiscent of Obama's apology tour when he became president. Is the UN going to go back to where it was as the unrepentant, we hate Israel body with no one to stand against that onslaught now that the American government is not led by Trump but is led by Biden?
Look, we're all very grateful to Nikki Haley who changed the whole tenor of Israel to UN. But I will say that for now, the coronavirus has really changed the tenor generally of the UN. The world is facing a global pandemic where only some countries have mastered or trying to master this challenge, this unprecedented challenge. And now that Israel is really probably the best, okay, it's much smaller than India, smaller than the United States, but now that Israel has mastered the coronavirus like no other nation, and is universally regarded as having done so, all mask mandates were removed from Israel this past Sunday. You're seeing very little criticism of Israel because its critics look stupid. Because the issue right now is not the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it's not the Middle Eastern conflict. The issue right now is the coronavirus and how it is devastating the world. And it might give Israel a whole new view, a whole new vision by other nations that want to turn to Israel. People always wanted Israeli technological know-how, agricultural know-how, military know-how. But now they want know-how just how to get out of this once-in-a-century pandemic. And we forget how bad things were even just 2 or 3 months ago. The fact that we can have a lecture like this right now is a miracle. It's going to happen a few months ago. Now, thank God the vaccines are proliferating. And so I see the UN as not focusing much on Israel over the next few months. If anything, it'll be about what they can learn from Israel. But Israel really has been off the map. I want to give you a help. You know, Golda Meir once said that good times will come to Israel when it gets as much media as Switzerland. Lately, Israel, with the exception of Iran, as you see about the Times, and Israel's getting as much press as Switzerland. Israel just had an election. It barely made any mark in the United States. I bet if I asked most of you, did Netanyahu win? You don't even know. It's barely. I'm not sure Netanyahu knows right now. He's just trying to build a coalition. But this has never happened before. Jews are news, but not lately, where everything else. Because the Jews have come out of the coronavirus in Israel, thank God, and no other nation besides the United States is even close. Even my wife's country, Australia, and yesterday New Zealand and Australia opened a corridor, so no forced quarantines. But that's because, you know, they killed the coronavirus in both countries, but at a tremendous cost, which is they have no vaccines, and of course there's no herd immunity, and of course there's no antibodies. So they're going to have to stay locked down for a long time. So it's beautiful that they can go between, you know, the two beautiful countries. I love New Zealand, I love Australia. I was a medical student for 2 years in Sydney, Australia. But how are these countries going to come out of the coronavirus? How are they going to open up? My wife can't visit her parents in Sydney, and we don't know when the next time she'll be able to. When is Australia? We know Israel's probably going to open up to the world, God willing, in June. The United States is already open, etc. And Hawaii is open. If you get a test, you can come to Hawaii. But when is Australia ever going to open? Who knows? So I see right now Israel gaining a whole new class because of how they've mastered this. And I have to give my dear friend, Ambassador Ron Dermer, who was our student at Oxford and my student president at Oxford, and Prime Minister Netanyahu tremendous credit, because they saw early that if Israel went aggressively for the vaccines and could tell Pfizer and other of the pharmaceutical giants that, look, we are the perfect test case for your vaccines, because people don't really trust the vaccines fully. But if you have a whole country of 10, 11, 300 million people is too many, but 11 million people, we could test them quickly, and if those people are healthy, and then we can reopen, that becomes a great selling point. And Israel said that to Pfizer said, you know what? Great argument. And that just shows you Jewish ingenuity in making that argument. And now it's really succeeded. Israel has reopened.
I have a question. What's the difference between a Nazi trying, experimenting on Jews, and Israel is doing the same to its own people right now? Vaccines are not approved right now. It's still experimental.
Can you repeat the question first?
So are you saying
Repeat the question.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So your question is, what's the difference between, you asked me,
Yeah.
what is the difference between the Nazis experimenting on Jews with pharmaceuticals and what Israel's doing to its citizens? So here's the difference. There are massive differences, but here's the main difference. First and foremost, the difference, of course, is that not only is Israel not the Nazis, that Israel is the most benevolent government in the history of the world. Given, one moment, please. Given the threats that Israel faces, it is easily the most compassionate, benevolent government in the history of the world. Never has there been a government facing an existential crisis of existence, every single day, that has preserved its democracy, human rights, judicial review, etc. Free press. No one has ever done that. Don't believe me? Look at the actions of our greatest president during the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln, universally regarded as the greatest president. He shut. I'm getting back to Israel. Abraham Lincoln shut down habeas corpus. You had no rights, essentially, as he said, for the Great Civil War. There's an insurrection. We have to stop the Confederacy. Israel has never done that. They've never suspended the writ of habeas corpus. Israelis have rights. Israeli Arabs have rights, etc., etc. That's the first difference. Israel is the most benevolent government. The Nazis were the greatest murderers in history. Second, Israel is not experimenting on its citizens.
It's not.
The vaccines, just 1 second, please. They're not experimenting with people like Mengele and killers who happen to have PhDs but were killers. The vaccines were developed by some of the world's most credible pharmaceutical
It's not
companies,
approved
and they were
yet.
tested. I had the vaccine, and thank God, I feel
Congratulations.
fine. And I think my own view is people should get the vaccine since we have to come out of this crisis. But we can't force it on anyone, God forbid. We can just have an opinion. That's also the difference. The Nazis took Jews and forcibly. Israel didn't force anyone to get the vaccine. What Israel is saying, however,
It's
is
forced
that
right now, the people who are not taking vaccine, they're second-class citizens. They cannot get into the restaurants, they cannot get into museums, they cannot get to a lot of public places. It's exactly the same that Nazis were doing to
yeah, but I could say the same thing. We're going off subject, but I could say the same thing. Almost everyone is a second-class citizen in the world right now, insofar as kids can't go to school, and you can't go into a coffee shop, and before I come to Hawaii, I have to prove that I'm not a disease carrier. I couldn't come to the state before I took
I'm
it.
not agreeing with that.
So do you think Hawaii should be open with no test? Maybe it should. Okay. Well, like Florida's like that. Okay. The point is, I'm never going to call Hawaii Nazis, God forbid.
We've got 2 minutes left on the feed, and it's going to be cut according to us.
We can continue.
Yeah, so
But can I just say, if you don't mind, just in finality, I'm sorry. I'm Shmuley. What's your name? What is it?
Allah.
Oh, nice to meet you. Listen, I appreciate the passion of your question, but may I say, respectfully, if you don't mind, very respectfully. However, many people are anti-vaccine. They have that right. That's the beauty of living in a democracy. But I think we have to be very careful about terminology. Using the word Israel and Nazi in the same sentence is something we have to be very careful about, because that's what our greatest enemies want to say. I was at a debate at Oxford University where I served as rabbi for 11 years, where a world-renowned Israeli academic who served in the IDF during the 1967 Six-Day War, actually an Israeli, world-renowned Oxford professor, in a debate that you can watch online with me, said that Israel was the Gestapo and the SS. And I looked at him and I said to him, you've just lost all academic credibility. Not only do you trivialize the Holocaust, and by the way, my organization, we raise money from all over the world, and we spend it on things that are not like bricks and mortar and buildings, not things we can point to 10 years. We spend it on ads, full-page ads in the New York Times and the Washington Post. And one of those ads, it cost us a fortune, full-page ad in the New York Times, was an ad against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, not politics. It was about the Holocaust, because she called the ICE detention centers on the border, Mexico and Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, she called them concentration camps. And we took it on ad saying, what the hell? Whatever you feel about the Trump immigration policies, or now the Biden immigration policies, which haven't changed that much from the Trump policies, whatever you feel about them, don't compare it to the Holocaust. American ICE agents are not the Gestapo. They are loyal American citizens, and if they're making mistakes, or okay, so then correct them. But to compare them to the Gestapo, and for AOC to call them concentration camps, I'll tell you what a concentration camp is. It's where his mother was. The Nazis, you want to talk about experimentation? Mengele used to take dye and inject it into the pupils of little Jewish babies to see how it would affect their vision. He would do surgery on living people. I've met some of them. No anesthetic. Hypothermia experiments, taking Jews and putting them in order to save German pilots, to see what are the effects of a German pilot being shot down in the North Sea. Mengele was one of the most vile human beings that ever lived. Whatever you think about Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, they are not that. And I just think we have to be careful, even if we're opposed to them, with language. Because you just said even about Christian Amanpour, it's about language. Let me just say one final thing. Rabbi Manis Friedman, the great Chabad scholar, he makes a point. A lot of what we talk about tonight, Barry, is how the morality of Israel's case has been lost because people use language that we don't fight back against. So Rabbi Manis Friedman says, if you look at the beginning of time, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and God and the snake, the serpent, comes to Adam and he says, isn't that a good fruit, the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? There's no such thing as a good fruit. There's a tasty fruit, there's a colorful fruit, there's a delicious fruit, but you cannot speak about fruit in moral categories. There's no evil fruit, and there's no good fruit. And why did the serpent use that language? To confuse the issue. The moment good and evil no longer makes sense, the moment we just use them for anything, the moment we say Pfizer is evil, or Israel's evil, and these people are Nazis, There's no more good and bad. We can, if people are opposed to the vaccinations, which I'm not, but they can do that in terms that do not trivialize the Holocaust, that do not belittle the murder of 1.5 million Jewish children, that does not make a mockery of 6 million Jews being gassed to death or being shot in a ravine in Babi Yar in the Ukraine. I'm going to finish with this. I went to one place. I started visiting Auschwitz in Poland 30 years ago. I was a rabbi at Oxford. One of our dear friends, Professor Jonathan Weber, today lives in Krakow. He was an Oxford professor. He was the guy that actually wrote the signs that you read on the Auschwitz museum where you visit today. He's a world expert in the death camp itself. He took me there for the first time, 31 years ago. We go to Tarnów, near Tarnów, where all the Jews were slaughtered. It's in Galicia, about an hour from Krakow. He takes me to a clearing out in the woods to show me a tree. I said, Jonathan, it's super hot, Polish summer. I'm wearing sandals, my feet are getting cut up. Where are we walking? You have to see this tree. I said, what's special about this tree? He said, I'll tell you about this tree. And there was no sign there, now there is, 30 years ago. He said they took all the babies, hundreds of Jewish orphans from an orphanage, and the SS brought them here in the clearing where no one could see, to shoot them in the head. The problem is when you tell little kids, stay in one place so we can blow your brains out, they think it's a game and they run around. So they couldn't shoot them. So the SS took them by their legs, swung them around, and dashed their brains against this tree where 600 Jewish children were murdered. That's where I stood. Today there's a plaque. That was the Nazis. We dare never trivialize what happened. And that's why we cannot make comparisons to the Holocaust. My wife's family is a Holocaust family. I just wrote this book, it's dedicated to her great uncle, murdered at 22. They put him on a train and his parents never saw him again. Her grandparents were snuck into Budapest across the Slovakia-Hungarian border by a farmer who was paid, covered them in straw, with the SS putting bayonets to see if there were any Jews there. That was the Holocaust. You cannot compare that to a shot going into someone's arm in a hospital. A bayonet that might go into your head. We cannot make that comparison. My organization does everything it can to preserve the memory of the 6 million. And we spend millions of dollars raising millions. And like I said, if you come to my house, you'll see, I just showed them to Pompeo, you'll see all these ads that are framed now, the New York Times. It's all, we don't have big buildings to show. Millions of dollars that we spent. One ad in the New York Times goes for a fortune. But we do it so we could reach millions of people so that the 6 million are remembered, or so that Israel is protected, or so that the Jewish people's enemies know that we fight back these days, that if you seek to defame us, just know that you're not going to do it with impunity. That if you call Israel a Gestapo nation, we're gonna fight back. There was a woman named Lorde. Who's heard of Lorde? 21-year-old singer from New Zealand. She's probably 25 now. I mean, this woman books concerts in Tel Aviv, and then they come to her in New Zealand and say, BDS, Israel's a Gestapo state. She cancels the concerts. We took out a full-page ad against her. And you know what we showed? She had just played for Putin's Russia. No issue with that. Natalie Portman, who's Israeli, gets the Genesis Prize from Israel. She decides, I'm not going to accept it. And you know why? Because Israel, what it does in Gaza, Israel does nothing in Gaza. Israel left Gaza. Hamas kills people in Gaza. But she doesn't know that. But that's not enough to stop her and her rank ignorance from defaming Israel. We took out a full-page ad showing, you can see it, full-page ad in the New York Times, a smiling Natalie Portman in Shanghai, China, smiling as she fronts the Shanghai Film Festival for communist China, for which she was paid God knows how much money. But she had a problem with her own native Israel. And we do all those ads. And we do it to make sure that 6 million are remembered, and never again means never again. So, I respect your opinion. I'm just asking, respectfully, that we be careful in how we say it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Okay.
Anything left?
How do you end your